guys, it's Kim. Today I'm reviewing a book that I'm actually super pumped about. I loved it, and it's really no surprise considering like everybody knows that I love this series. And it's funny because the first time I read the series through, I didn't read this book. This time I did, and it's like looking back, I don't know how I could have possibly skipped it before. I actually read this one on my Kindle because I finished the Divergent series and I just like couldn't handle like waiting the next day to go to the bookstore, so I had to download it right away, and I read it like way into the night even though I had to be up early the next morning. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this very well, but this is sort of what the cover looks like. Let me see if I can clear that up for you a bit. There we go. You can like see the Ferris wheel on there. So it's 4 by Veronica Roth. This would be the 4th installment of the Divergent series, I guess, in a way, but it's more so like a side story. I ended the Divergent series and I was like, I just need more 4. So I went and downloaded the book, and yeah, as I said, I'm really glad I did because it gave me a lot of perspective into 4's character. Interestingly enough, I just read the introduction that Veronica Roth wrote in it. She said that she actually started writing Divergent from Tobias's perspective first, but about 30 pages in, it just wasn't quite right for the story she wanted to tell, but she kept him in the story just in a different way, which is a relief because we all know that 4 is the best character, let's be honest. It starts out with Tobias in abnegation, so we get to see a little bit of Tobias's life in detail when he was living with Marcus and being abused every day. His thought process about why he wanted to get out, and my cats are meowing in my room, so I'm so sorry if you're all hearing all this, but whatever. His thought process when it comes to switching, we see him sort of almost going through this hesitation to switch factions. He almost doesn't, but at the last second he decides to join Dauntless, which is like, obviously we knew that was gonna happen. I was almost like worried, no Tobias, you have to choose Dauntless. These characters always come very alive to me, and it's even though I know the ending, I still was like very enthralled in their emotional journey, and the fact that it's possible that he might have stayed in abnegation and then the whole story would have been ruined. We get to see a lot of his initiation tests, him going through his fear landscapes for the first time. We get to see Ammar. We met the character Ammar in Allegiant. He was 4's initiation instructor. He was actually the one who gave Tobias the nickname 4 once Tobias went through the fear landscape and only came out with 4 fears. Ammar was romantically interested in Tobias, but it never worked out that way because Tobias is not gay. You see a lot of 4's interaction with Eric. Eric was basically a jerk right from the get-go. He was in with the Erudite obviously from the time he transferred. We see a lot of his interaction with Max. Tobias has been asked over and over to be in the leadership on Dauntless, and he just keeps saying no. The reason for that is because that would involve him seeing Marcus on a very consistent basis, and he hopes to never see Marcus again. We get to see the scene where he got his tattoos. He sort of makes this transition from being this really cowardly little kid to being the brave 4 that we all know and love. Oh, and another thing, we get to see into his relationship with Evelyn, which was actually kind of shocking for me because we find out that 4 actually had a lot of contact with her after she initially made that contact. It mentioned it in, I believe it was Insurgent. 4 knew his mom was alive, and he sort of said, yeah, well, she sent me a cryptic message. I knew she was alive. What we didn't know is that he actually had more than one meeting with her. The first time they met, he was like, I don't want anything to do with you because you left me alone with Marcus. But then he sent her another message that was like, I'm not willing to talk to you right now, but someday. So he left that open-ended, and he's already had a little bit of building relationship with her. We didn't know that reading the Divergent series. So that was really interesting to me. Just there was more than one encounter with his mom. The book 4 is split up into 4 parts, so it's basically just 4 different short stories about the character 4. 4, the transfer, that's all about his life before and during his transfer into Dauntless. For the Initiate, the story about his initiation process and all his fear tests, his fear landscapes. For the Sun, when we find out all that stuff about Evelyn. For the Traitor, which is where it starts to cross over with Triss. The reason I didn't read 4 the first time is because I thought the entire book would just be like rereading the book, just like the Divergent book, just from 4's perspective. Well, that sounds kind of cool, but not enough for me to spend money on this book. But that's not how it was. As we saw with the first 3 short stories in this book, it's like you're learning completely different stuff. The 4th short story in this book is where it starts to cross over, which is still really nice to have. Like, you get to see certain circumstances from 4's perspective, and it just makes their romance even cuter. We see him and Triss's interaction in some of Triss's fear landscapes, like what he was thinking when she was showing Divergent aptitudes. We have the scene where they go through 4's landscape together, which was really cool. And actually, yes, I want to touch on this because I did not understand how much Triss had an impact, or why she had an impact on Tobias when they walked through his fear landscape. Because at the end, she was like, "Don't worry, Tobias, we got through it." And he was like, "You got me through it." And I was just like, that doesn't make any sense, because you've gone through your fear landscape like countless times already. That's just like over romanticizing what just happened. But it made way more sense in this book, because what actually happened, she showed him in the Marcus part, she showed him that he had the power to overcome Marcus, which he didn't understand at all before. In his fear landscapes before, when confronting Marcus, he basically just had to kind of lie down and take it. There are 2 ways to get past your fear landscape. In Dauntless, you can either find a way to face your fear. So for example, facing a fear of heights would be to jump off the building, which he was able to do in his other fears. With this one, he could not figure out a way to face it head on. So the other way to get through your fear landscape is to just make your heart rate calm down. So that's the way he always did it in the past. He just sort of had to sit there and take the beating from the multiple Marcuses in his fear landscape. But Triss, all of a sudden she came in and she stood in front of him and took the whip and whipped Marcus back. That's why he was so grateful when they came out. She opened a door to him understanding that he could actually confront this fear, as opposed to just pretending like it wasn't happening. She gave him a way to actually address it and overcome it. So that made so much more sense to me. When I was reading Divergent, that was one of the times when I was just like, oh, that's sort of cheesy. The puzzle pieces really all fell into place for that scene. Another important scene one that stood out to me was the one where Triss was getting attacked by Peter and Al and Drew, when she was about to get thrown over the chasm. And then in Divergent, 4 kind of just pops out of nowhere, and Triss even asked him, like, what were you doing? Like, why were you down here? And he was just like, oh, coming back from the control room. We find out that's true, but we find out exactly what he was doing there, which was spying on Max and Eric and trying to figure out if they had anything going on with the erudite, because he was already suspicious. So that's what he was looking into when Triss was getting attacked. So he was coming back from the control room from his little spying session, and that's why he was out and about that night. It wasn't super important of a detail. Like, it's not like reading Divergent, I was like, oh, I'm missing this huge gap. Like, where were you for? This is just way too convenient. Like, it wasn't like that, but it's just like a little extra puzzle piece that fit in that just made the series all the better. I really love just all the different puzzle pieces that this book filled in for me. It's like you didn't even know you had certain questions until you read this book. And then the last part of the book is her just giving you different scenes that are straight from Divergent but flipped to Tobias's perspective. The first jumper, not a whole lot of new stuff there. He just kind of is impressed that she is abnegation and she's the first jumper. He was the very last jumper during his initiation, so he was like, really, this stiff was the first jumper? Like, that I didn't even jump first. Then another scene we get to see is the drunk scene. Triss comes out, I think she just got a tattoo or something. Tobias is with his friends like Zeke and Shauna. They're like by the chasm and they've been drinking, and Tobias comes over and he's like Triss, and everyone's like, whoa, like he like called Triss out. In his drunken state, he just like really lets his feelings be known and was like, you look good, Triss. Probably one of my favorite scenes in Divergent between the two of them. And I don't know why. The part where he's like, yeah, you're not supposed to see me this way, and she's like, what, drunk? And he's like, yeah, wait, no, like real, I guess. I don't know why I find that so cute. We get to see his perspective from this. He's cringing looking back on that now because he's like, man, like I crossed a line that is so inappropriate of an initiation instructor, like doing that to an initiate, like talking to her that way. So he's like freaking out a bit, and he's just like, why is this girl doing this to me? So it's really cute. The third scene that we get to see is the careful Tris one, when they're eating their first meal, those hamburgers that Tris doesn't know what they are. She happens to be sitting by Tobias. She asks him something about himself, and he's just like, let me try and find it. Yeah, okay, so this is the part where we get Tris asking him, were you a transfer too? And he's like, oh, like I knew I would have trouble with the candor coming and asking unnecessary questions, but I didn't think I would have trouble with stiffs as well. And she's just like, oh, well, it must be because you're so approachable, kind of like a bed of nails. And then he's like, careful, Tris. He was actually really impressed because even though he could see her face flushing, like she knew she like stepped out of line, she wouldn't look away, she looked him in the eye, she owned that. He liked her. He said like, there's no way I view her as an initiate. I view her basically as like a co-worker. Her maturity and her attitude and the way she deals with things, like there's no way I can look down on her as a student. So I think that's where he started seeing that come out of her, is that careful Tris moment. Another thing we get in this little section is his conversation with Eric. They have that really awkward conversation that sort of seems out of nowhere. We get a little bit of context around that, which we've already started, which we saw a lot of development more so in the rest of the book of 4. But now that conversation makes like 100% more sense. One thing I was super surprised about was there was no Ferris wheel scene from 4's perspective, which I'm a little bit confused about actually. Like, it's not that I necessarily need it, but out of like the 3, like the careful Tris, the first jumper, and the drunk scene, why not make it a nice number 4 from the Ferris wheel scene? Like, that's like probably the most famous scene between him and Tris. That's like the big deal. I don't know why it wasn't included. There must be a reason, but like there is a Ferris wheel on the cover of the book, so I kind of figured that we were going to be getting that perspective. I guess Veronica Roth has her reasons. I guess we don't really need his perspective, but it just would have been an extra moment for those warm fuzzies that we all feel when we're reading about him and Tris's romance. Anyways, the big thing about this book is that my perspective of 4 actually completely changed. I was having trouble grasping his character a little bit before because it was like the initiation instructor 4, and then once he falls in love with Tris, it's like he was almost a completely different person to me. And then I found myself missing that side of 4 because it was just such a blatant difference. Like all of a sudden he was he wasn't a complete softie, but he wasn't the like hard, edgy guy that just like was mysterious and didn't give away any parts of himself. So I was just seeing like there was a bit of a disconnect for me between those two halves of 4, and this book really brought it together for me. At points throughout this book, I actually had trouble picturing the initiation instructor 4 at all. It's like I couldn't even picture him physically the same in my mind. You understand him a lot better because you know what he's thinking, you've seen him go through the abuse, you've seen everything he's thinking, you see his insecurities, you see them so blatantly. So now instead of having 2 different sides of 4, those 2 sides of 4 are just completely connected. Now I can see why the initiation 4 is the same as the softie 4. In Allegiant, you actually get that book from Tris's perspective and 4's perspective. That's what threw me off about 4, was it's like, you aren't the same 4 as I thought I knew. Seeing that kind of 4 throughout the whole series really helped me put his character into perspective, and I still love him just as much as I did before. He's an amazing character. This book served to bring a lot more depth and perspective to his character. We get him a lot more than we did just sort of like kind of understanding him from Tris's perspective. Now we get all his thoughts. We get the complete version of 4. And for that, I am thankful this book was written. This might be me just coming off my high, but in reference to the rest of the series, I give this book a 10 out of 10. Like, it filled in a lot of holes. I would say if you're going to read Divergent, please take the time to read 4. I'm going to go out and buy it on hardcover for my bookshelf because I loved it so much. Who doesn't get to the end of the Divergent series and just be like, I need more 4 in my life? You need more 4 in your life, go get this book. It's awesome. If you have any thoughts about the book, just put them in the comments below. I want you to get involved in the discussion with me. If this book made you see 4 in a different way, just like it did for me, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Give me a shout. That's my review for today. Thanks everyone for watching.